Welcome, Duke alumni and friends, to this session of the Duke Alumni Forever Learning Institute, an interdisciplinary educational program organized in a set of thematic courses. I'm Ann Stephenson, Director of Professional Development on the Lifelong Learning team. Thank you for joining our program today, Pushing Research Limits. This program is part of our theme, Contextualizing 100 Years at Duke, which will examine the economic, societal, technological, and social layers that built Duke's foundation and made it into the university it is today. Today's program is the fourth session in the Contextualizing 100 Years at Duke series, and it will explore Duke's commitment to interdisciplinary research to improve health, fight disease, and advance technology for the world. We will host a Q&A session at the end of our discussion, so please put your questions in the chat for our panelists to respond to. I'm super excited to introduce our host and moderator, Robin Rasor. She's the Associate Vice President of the Office of Translation and Commercialization. Robin oversees all functions of the tech transfer process here at Duke University. She received an MS degree in genetics from the Ohio State University and a BS in bacteriology and zoology from Ohio Wesleyan University. Robin has earned the Certified Licensing Professional credential and is past president and chair of the Board of Governors of Certified Licensing Professionals. Welcome to the Forever Learning Institute, Robin.
Well, thank you so much for introducing me, and also for all the people who are listening in who are looking forward to hearing a little bit about innovation and technology resulting at Duke. Even though you're all alumni, you may not know that currently there are 7 drugs on the market, ranging for treatments of breast and brain cancer to rare disease, that came and directly resulted from research at Duke. You may also not know that the first quantum computing company that went public also came from Duke. In the last since 2020, Duke has received over $400 million in royalty revenue resulting from products that the market has said they want to buy and make an impact in the world. We have right now over 125 spin-out companies that in the last 4 or 5 years have raised over $2 billion in investment from venture capital and other investors. So we didn't get there immediately. This is, has taken a long path. So we thank you for joining us in this journey. And so between the 3 of us panelists, believe it or not, we have over 100 years in service to Duke. I'm the young one of the group. So what I'd like to do before we start sort of the discussion is introduce our 2 great speakers. Sandy, do you want to introduce yourself first, and then we'll go to George?
Sure. Thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure to be on this panel today with Robin and George. And we didn't get together just to do this. We've been working together, if not daily, at least weekly for several years now, focusing on this effort to take excellent Duke research and move it more quickly and more effectively out into the real world, which almost always involves a commercialization step. Just a word about me. I do have over 50 years of a love affair with Duke. My positions here have spanned the spectrum from student, faculty member, dean, university vice president, and now senior advisor. I'm a physician. Thanks to my education at Duke, I'm a physician. I'm a scientist in biochemistry and molecular biology, and I've held a variety of leadership roles. My experience at Duke has been punctuated, however, by roughly 10-year jobs in other places. I've been at the University of Texas. I've been at the University of California, San Francisco, and I've had shorter stays at Harvard, Oxford, and the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. So I've seen research at Duke from every perspective, and I've seen it in other places too. So I'll bring some of that comparative experience to bear on our discussion today. But as you can tell, I love Duke, met my wife here, married in the Duke Chapel. We're a 3-generation Duke family.
Okay, so boy, George, you're next.
Hi, I'm George Truskey. I'm a professor of biomedical engineering at Duke. I actually arrived here in 1987, 2 years after getting my PhD at MIT. I have had a number of roles at Duke. As a faculty member, I've done research in a number of areas related to vascular bioengineering, and currently we develop what are known as microphysiological systems. These are engineered human tissues that we develop in the lab to model disease states and look at therapeutics. I've also held a number of administrative roles. I was a department chair of biomedical engineering for 8 years. I was in the dean's office for a number of years, served as interim dean. And also I was in, most recently, the office of the vice president for research. I've been at Duke my whole career after two years at Tufts University. There have been opportunities to leave, but Duke's such a wonderful place that nothing can match what Duke offered.
Well, let's set the stage just as a reminder to the audience. Our time frame is 1975 to 2000. And some of you may not realize before 1980, universities didn't actually own the inventions that were made with federal funding. The federal government owned them. And then there was an act called the Bayh-Dole Act that happened in 1980 that changed that and put ownership back to the universities, which essentially created the whole tech transfer, I guess I would say profession. Most universities didn't really start tech transfer offices until the late 80s, early 90s. Duke's office for first tech transfer office started in 1984. So starting with Sandy, you came in 1970, right around the time when Bob Lefkowitz was inventing the G protein coupled receptors that ultimately resulted in his getting the Nobel Prize. The Comprehensive Cancer Center had just been founded or started. Can you describe kind of what attracted you to come to Duke?
Yes, it was a very exciting time at Duke. Duke it was then and is now the youngest of the premier research universities of the world, and it was just hitting its stride. Something quite magical happened here from the mid-50s into the 70s when I came. And what were the ingredients of that? One, I think it was creative rule breaking by the leaders here. We had a unique medical school curriculum that attracted me, that emphasized research side by side with becoming excellent in clinical medicine. We had a partnership between physicians and scientists and engineers at Duke that was much more intimate than in other settings. I think some key leaders stand out. Phil Handler, who became the president of the National Academy of Sciences in biochemistry, Gene Stead, later Gene Weingarten, David Sabiston, and other clinical department chairs embraced this partnership with science. And it crossed over into engineering. I mean, a number of medical engineering advances that are quite prominent came from Duke following that era. So I call it a great flowering, and there was a magnetism for talented people to come here. Bob Lefkowitz being the standout of that. And we'll talk later about what that meant as time passes. But that magic of Duke being the hot place, particularly in medicine and biomedical engineering, to go among American universities at that time was quite paramount. In my other leadership roles, I've always urged current leaders, myself included, to let's not lose that magic and let's recreate it and advance it in our time.
So, George, you came a bit later in 1987 when Duke had the first NSF-funded Biomedical Engineering Research Center, and Duke Engineering, or the College of Engineering, was starting to become known for its research in ultrasound, cardiac electrophysiology, and others. Can you talk a little bit about how the Biomedical Engineering Department was formed and how it grew to be and continues to be one of the top BME departments in the country?
Sure. Well, first of all, but when I was looking for a faculty position, biomedical engineering as a discipline was relatively new. There weren't a lot of departments. There were a few. Duke was one of the first. Its origins started in the 1960s. Theo Pilkington, who was an electrical engineer, became very interested in cardiac electrophysiology and felt that the department he was in, electrical engineering at Duke, just didn't quite match everything he did. He certainly benefited from a lot of the foundational work. So through a variety of actions, he was able to form the department. Now, at that time in the 60s, there were only 3 other departments in the school. So dividing the pie from 3 to 4 was quite a task. Theo was quite creative and managed to take budget lines and somehow managed to grow them so he could hire several faculty. The original focus was in electrophysiology and in ultrasound. It became a department in 1971. And we also had the first approved undergraduate major. So it was really a pretty exciting time. The department grew slowly over time into the mid 80s. And what attracted me was the opportunity to go to a top department. We were always competing with Hopkins at the time for being number 1, and we still are. And the fact that the medical school had such an excellent reputation, the opportunities for collaboration were just too much to pass off. And so I came, and it was really pretty exciting.
So now we'll go. So Sandy, starting in like the 1990s, we saw the formation of the Vaccine Institute in 1990, the Clinical Research Institute in 1991, the health system in, I can't read, 1998. What was happening in the 80s that led up to the formation of these major institutes, and how did the leadership of Duke kind of create these competitive advantages?
The best way to understand that, if you're not in the business we're in, is that there's always a tension in universities and academic medical centers between the established disciplinary departments, medicine, surgery, engineering, biology, and so forth. And those departments are precious creatures. They have to be nurtured, and department chairs play vital roles in the life of a university or medical center. But there's a tension between investing resources and energy and the allegiance of individual people to these narrow disciplines versus interdisciplinarity. When people from one department partner with people from another department to do something different. And that led to a lot of what I call institutional experiments with centers, institutes, initiatives. They go by a number of names, where you're mixing and mixing and matching faculty from different departments and different schools. And Duke proved particularly adept at this. I think our relative youth, the fact that we've got less ivy on our walls and less sort of hidebound traditions and ways of doing things, created a boldness. And out of that, the Cancer Center was one of the first in the country. You mentioned the DCRI, the Duke Clinical Research Institute, became the dominant creature of its type by a factor of 10-fold over any other university. The Human Vaccine Institute comes on a little later, but had its origins there. So Duke was experimenting in ways that I think gave us an advantage over other research universities. Not all those experiments worked. Some were more successful than others, but the ones that clicked have, transformed the university up to the time today.
And George, can you talk a little bit about some of the other interdisciplinary centers that the provost at the time, what was his name, Peter Lang, started creating during this time period?
Yes, as Sandy mentioned, there was a big push to do interdisciplinary work. I mean, people were trying to collaborate, but the Department of Resources weren't always adequate. So Peter Lang became provost in '99, and he saw an opportunity to seed a number of emerging areas. there were initially like five centers, some with the medical school, some what was the Institute for Genome Science and Policy, the Institute for Brain Science, and that involved a number of departments in arts and science, engineering, the School of Medicine. There was the Franklin Humanities Center that came out, the Keenan Institute for Ethics. So you can see a very broad group. If you actually look what we have today, we have 11, but many of the original ones are not there because the idea was not that these become embodied in perpetual activities, but they have a mission to fulfill. And when they accomplish their mission, they're over with, or they evolve into something else. And that's great. I mean, you see a lot of institutions, the institutes and centers never die, but here at Duke, they come and go because they have a clear mission. And once their mission becomes ingrained in the institution, their job is done.
You know, as Sandy mentioned, the three of us have worked together for a while, but I'm still the newbie to Duke. I came here in 2016. And when we got together to talk about this, this webinar, George told a story that I'd never heard that I wanted him to tell to everybody else about Duke almost lost its engineering school. And so I really would like you to tell that story because I think that's fascinating.
At the time in the 80s and 90s, the School of Engineering was relatively small. We had about 60 faculty. We wanted to compete with the big schools, but we were half the size of other private institutions and probably a third or a quarter of the size of major state institutions like Michigan and Illinois and Berkeley and so forth. The upper administration really reevaluated engineering. They really made a decision like, should we go forward with engineering or should we just maybe take what's the best part and do something else with it? Fortunately for a lot of us, the decision was to continue, and not only to continue, but to build engineering and to make it something more than it was, more than a little boutique activity. One of the efforts of that was to hire Christina Johnson as dean. She came in 1999, and she was transformative. I mean, the school was already on an upward trajectory. I think one of the things that we had done was we hired a lot of junior faculty who were great, but when they got tenure, because in the 90s, because Duke was doing so well, doing okay but not great, they were lured away. But she tried to end that by a number of things. She was hiring more senior faculty, so that made it attractive for the junior faculty. She built the CMOS building, which was 2 to 3 times larger than anyone thought. And she really pushed innovation and entrepreneurship within engineering. And a lot of the faculty she hired really emphasized that in their work. So the school we are now today is much different than we were in the 90s.
Yeah, it's still just the thought of losing engineering. And then Sandy, we had talked a little bit about sort of the collaboration between School of Medicine and Engineering to build that wonderful building that I'm sure many of the alumni are familiar with.
Well, as you heard, Christina Johnson, who was a very dynamic and transformative dean, came to Duke in 1999. And I returned to Duke after 11 years at the University of Texas in 2001 to be dean of the medical school. And I was casting about for opportunities for the medical school to advance itself in the best possible way. And I saw this flowering of engineering, right? 50 steps down the road from my office in the medical school. And so I sought out Christina, and George mentioned that the CMOS building was twice as large as anyone thought it could be. And that's because I co-invested. The medical school and the engineering school went in together for a building. This was controversial in some circles. It wasn't welcomed by tribalists, I'd say, but we deemed it the right thing, and I think history is proven it to have been very useful. The partnership between medicine and engineering antedated that by a long time, so we weren't having trouble collaborating. But I think when you co-locate, sparks fly that otherwise might not prosper.
And I also add to that, in some places where schools co-invest, it's floor 1 is school 1 and floor 2 was school 2, but that's not what happened. We had faculty intermixing in the same floors, and the collaborations really blossomed as a result of that.
And one other little tidbit of Duke lore I'll insert. I mentioned Jim Weingarten before as one of the architects of the great flowering of research excellence at Duke in the medical school in the 70s and 80s. Um, uh, Jim is actually the reason that Bob Lefkowitz came to Duke. Jim recruited Bob Lefkowitz. My friend Andy Wallace, who chaired cardiology, was one of these people who attracted the talent at the time too. He co-recruited Bob, and so Jim Weingarten later became the director of the National Institutes of Health. He had a career after his time at Duke of real distinction. And inside the CMUS building is a memorial to Jim Weingarten that features a lot of interesting artifacts from his career. So a stalwart of Duke medicine is actually honored most fully in the building shared with engineering.
I always reminded when I listen to this collaboration, because when I left industry and went to my first academic job, I remember saying something, "Oh, I'm so relieved to go to academia, no more politics." And people were just laughing at me. And I didn't realize until I got to academia what a stupid thing that was. But Duke, that I didn't realize, but Duke has really managed to sort of get over that. And I think those of you, certainly the alums, will remember one advantage that we have is how small physically we are. And I think I came from two big schools, the Ohio State University and Michigan, and you almost have to drive to every meet. I mean, they're just enormous physical groups of buildings. And at Duke, I can walk to almost all of my meetings with innovators. It's very common when I'm walking to CMOS or walking to the med school that I will see someone from another, I'll be on the engineering campus and I'll see someone from the med school. It's very common to see that. And I think that's a real advantage that we have. I think I'll open it to both of you. Are there any other things that strike you over the years that also give, I mean, we do have a great basketball team, but other things that strike you as real advantages that Duke has?
Actually, Robin, I do want to address that, but let me just go back to the partnership between medicine and engineering and point out a more recent feature of how it works still today, the seeds of which were laid back then. One of Duke's most prominent scientists, engineers, and innovators is Charlie Gersbach, who has a joint appointment between engineering and medicine. Every school on the planet wants Charlie Gersbach to go work for them, but we've kept him here through, I think, largely because he finds that partnership pleasing. So this we draw strength when we can reach beyond our departmental and school boundaries. That's always been my principle. And the fact that Duke is facile at that is, I think, one of the points of real attraction.
And he might also say the tech transfer office works with him.
Absolutely.
I feel like I text him every morning. So yes, it's also, I think, that a lot of the faculty will say there is this advantage of having a lot of teamwork in the whole innovation translation area, because these are the kind of faculty that bring in students who want to start up companies, the faculty want to start up companies. But Charlie's a good example. His research, while it may be, quote, biomedical engineering, he has to work with the clinicians and the people in the med school, because he won't be able to translate, his ideas into a patient without that kind of collaboration. And I think that's a real advantage for our engineers and our biomedical engineers, that literally they're right there and those connections run really deep.
Yeah, in terms of unique features or advantages of Duke, I mean, one thing that I find excellent all around is for the students, both the undergraduates and graduate students. We really attract top students. They're very creative too, and that's really helped the faculty really move forward. Another thing which not everyone appreciates is Duke is not a very hierarchical institution. I mean, it's easy for faculty to talk, junior faculty to talk to a dean or higher up. And so that makes it a little bit easier to do risk too, to take risk. I think that Duke has always tried to do things that other institutions don't do. And people have been receptive to that. And now I think you see that there's funding that's really pushing people to take risks in basic research and knowing that it'll be applied and so forth. So there are now a number of funds that weren't there when I was a junior faculty that really can help people with great ideas, but that are a bit risky to move forward.
I like to, I've always followed this principle in my leadership roles. There's 4 ingredients for success in research, and success in research is an absolute prerequisite for success in translation. The first is getting creative people to your school. That's job one. It's the people and their qualities that matter more than anything else. And that takes a village to do that. They won't come and they won't prosper unless the second point is they have to see an environment where others are being successful and where it's challenging but nurturing at the same time. And Duke has been able to provide that. The third feature is they need the tools that their research requires. And sometimes those are multi-million-dollar devices like cryo-electron microscopes that no single faculty member can explore. So you need these structures in the university to give the scientists and engineers the tools they have to have. Then the final point is the one George was mentioning, and probably really the most critical after getting the talent there in the first place, is the freedom to explore. Scientists who are living hand to mouth, filling out papers all the time, just drowning in the management of their laboratory and in the financing of their laboratory, are less likely to make those breakthrough creative leaps that lead to the really important discoveries. So you've got to create a financial structure, a reward structure, and a social peer environment that encourages exploration, which often means failure, at least temporarily. So to me, those are the ingredients that we try to foster.
The other thing that we haven't, and we did mention that the health system was, started in this time frame, but I think another thing that again, coming from 2 other institutions, both that had medical schools and health systems, but I never worked anywhere where the health system was so interconnected with us. And especially now with AI and patient data and the whole ability to use AI and that data to do diagnostics, prognostics. And we have this ability now at Duke, and we have people in engineering and computer science combining with the clinicians and the people in the med school, and then a very willing health system to also collaborate with all these people and be, I guess I would say, innovative and thoughtful about how to use that data in support of new ideas and new technologies. I think is another advantage that Duke has, that we're small enough but big in research, but we're small enough to everybody be willing to talk to each other and figure out a way to solve these kinds of problems, where at big institutions, like Sandy says, where there's a lot of hierarchy, it's much more difficult to get things negotiated and done. And you guys have both been here longer. Was it always like this? Has it changed? Or, was the beginning of it in the 70s?
Well, I'll speak specifically to the health system. Before the health system, there was Duke Hospital and outpatient clinics associated with Duke, and that was it. The health system brought in.
Was it separate? Was it still part of Duke?
It was always part of Duke.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to get technical. The physician practice group, however, was not part of Duke. That was a very unusual structure. But the hospital has always been part of Duke, and I think it's been helpful that the leaders of the health system have themselves been Duke faculty members throughout history. And maintaining that, I mean, health care today is a difficult, demanding 24/7 business that not only to care for patients properly, but to be financially viable in a very competitive landscape. It wasn't like that in the 1970s. Hospitals were not the kinds of structures they are today. So the creation of the health system was an absolute necessity to deal with the medical marketplace as it's evolved and continues to evolve. But to me, what I hope Duke has had and always will retain is this intimate relationship between the university, the research mission, the educational mission, and the clinical care mission. When those can compete at times for resources and attention, but you need centripetal forces that keep those worlds together, and it takes a lot of work, goodwill, and Duke has found that. I hope we always can.
Another thing, and George, you may I don't remember when it started at Duke, but I think it was during this time frame, was the Coulter Translational Partnership. So Wallace Coulter, when he died, left had a foundation, and the whole objective, he invented the Coulter counter for those people who aren't familiar with Wallace Coulter, and he created these interdisciplinary centers across the country. And I think Duke was, I know, one of the first ones.
Yes.
And I don't know when, do you remember when it first?
Oh, yes, I was department chair then. They announced it in 2005, and it was actually even for engineers, it was a little bit of a radical idea, because it was really getting faculty to rethink their purpose. It wasn't just simply writing academic papers; it was actually making inventions. So we were one of 10 schools that was chosen for this partnership, and this was a real partnership. They were there, right there, as Robin knows now.
Yeah, Michigan had one, so I dealt with it there.
And they basically gave us money for 5 years, and the carrot at the end was, if we were successful and met their metrics, we could get an endowment. Of course, it took them 2.5 years to tell us what the metrics were. But we had a good sense of it. And we had a great person, Barry Myers, who was really leading the charge in the translational part. And the other innovation that they had was it had to be, all the research that was funded had to be collaborative between the School of Medicine and the School of Engineering. There had to be a clinician involved in these projects. So it couldn't be some wild idea that an engineer had that had no real value. It had to be something that met an unmet clinical need. And that Duke, it resonated very well. And their other innovation was to get the basically a person who could, they call it a Coulter project manager, which Barry's role is, but it's more than that. But it could really run the program and build these relationships. So we got the endowment, and it's been great since then.
Well, and it continues. And I think for the people that aren't familiar with it, it started as this, as George says, it was real translational money, and most university technology is too early to just go out and get licensed or get invested in. And so it gave that initial money to do the proverbial over the valley of death, or to build a prototype. But it also, like George says, it made the engineers work on something with a clinician that had value. But it also, the clinicians often have the idea, but they don't know how to put it together or make it actually work. The other advance that the Coulter program had was saying you would have outside advisors. So it wasn't, no offense, it wasn't a bunch of faculty deciding which projects to fund. The idea was you had industry advisors from the outside who would review these proposals, not only for their technical potential, but for their market potential. And so that program became so successful across the 10 universities that when I was at Michigan, the state of Michigan started a program based on the Coulter Foundation. And then at Duke, we've been fortunate in the last number of years to have a donor, Ned Gahuli, donate enough money for us to have a translational fund. And we operate it very similarly to Coulter, but it's available for all technologies across Duke, not just to, BME and clinicians. So I think the Coulter, that translational partnership set up a really nice model that other translational funds and states and other universities continue to use to this day.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, when you got the money from Coulter, it wasn't, what's your next experiment? It's how are you going to translate this? Are you going to start a company? Or are you going to sell the ideas to industry and so forth? So it really forces you to rethink what your end goal is for research.
Yeah, and if anybody, and again, if anybody on the call is interested, you can go. The Duke still has we maintain a website that lists all the startups, the successes, the follow-on funding that have come from the Coulter Translational Partnership. I'm a little conscious of time.
Robin, can we, before you move on, could we return to that question about what makes Duke special in terms of the whole university environment? I was just thinking about my own career decisions at 3 points in time. I worked at 3 other great research institutions: Harvard, the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, and the University of California, San Francisco. So the science environment there was absolutely splendid, and I had wonderful colleagues. And but I came back to Duke 3 times. Why did I do that? I think it's because Duke science measured up, but Duke provided the extra advantage of this world-class but intimate human scale university. You can walk from one end of everything in 20 minutes. I can have dinner with French professors. I did last week. Not so easy to do in medical centers, however great, that are separated from their parent universities, or in the complexity of the Boston environment. They wanted me to be a department chair there once, but my lab was going to be in one part of town. I'd see patients in another part of town, and I'd have to live in yet another part of town. And just the logistics of surviving Boston, where, I spend most of my life at Duke now without even getting in the car. I can walk to my meetings. It's wonderful. And
it is. And I to this day, I can walk to a meeting and run into a dean, run into one of my, I mean, half the time I'm late to a meeting because, someone's talking to me. But I think that also brings up another question. And I do want to remind everybody, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I did not live here, but I suspect that the environment around Duke was very different in that time frame when both of you were first coming. There's a lot of changes in downtown Durham that certainly relate to Duke. I don't know if either of you want to talk about sort of those changes that happened when you first got here.
George and I both live in downtown Durham. George, you want to speak to that?
I lived in Trinity Park all the time. We've been in Durham. In fact, when we first moved here, we were right across the street from Sandy and Jennifer.
Yeah, that's right.
But no one talked about going downtown then. And there were lots of apartment buildings, and people would leave Trinity Park when their children got to school age. But that's very different. The George Watts School is now an excellent Montessori school. It's highly prized and so forth, and everyone wants to live in and near downtown now. So it's a completely different environment, and it's really nice for us.
Well, the beauty of the campus in all seasons never ceases to thrill me. I often walk through the Duke Gardens. I'm there in Cameron every time they open the door. The full university experience is hard to beat.
Yeah, I will say there is, even though you can't walk to downtown Durham now with the Chesterfield building and biolabs, so this engineering maintains, I don't know if it's a whole floor, but a whole section of Chesterfield called The Bridge, which is arguably an incubator for early stage startup companies in this whole area called biolabs. The Quantum Computing Center is also in the Chesterfield building. And we see, and even in the almost 10 years that I've been here, more and more students are staying here because they're getting jobs at the startup companies that are being formed, and many of them located in downtown Durham. So, and now I'm going to have to read, I can't see anything. So one of the questions is, one thread of current research and commercialization is material science. George, can you talk about the history of material science in the ME department and why material science became such a strength?
I think it's a result of the people that were hired here. There was an opportunity, it's not exclusive, but there's a lot of material science that deals with biomedical engineering. Biomedical engineering hired a number of people in biomaterials, but so did mechanical engineering. There was a little bit of tension because the material science faculty were once a small fraction of the department, but we hired such great people and they stayed on, and there were a lot of collaborations that material science is probably equivalent in terms of the faculty as mechanical engineers. But it's, I think, really strengthened because of the opportunities with the medical school. Robin mentioned Ken Gall, who's a mechanical engineer, and I think he was very attracted by all the opportunities there. He does a lot of material science work. There are others. So that again, the medical school collaboration has been a big driver, not exclusively, but an important driver.
I'm going to post two things actually. Our office has a timeline and an exhibit for the 100th celebration. And so if any of you are really interested in going way back, what we did, we spent a fair amount of time with the archivists, looking back and looking at early innovations, the first patents. Now, again, way back when, Duke really didn't have a patent office or anybody, but we tried to find all the innovations that we could. And then we also have a traveling exhibit. If anybody comes onto campus, it moves around. It's about 6 feet wide and it's pretty interesting. But if you haven't seen the traveling exhibit and you're in town or you're interested in it, you can, we usually post where it's located, but you can also see an electronic version of a timeline of all the different inventions, the first startups that came out of Duke, the first products, things like that. And then whoever had asked about materials, I know we all know Ken Gall, but those of you alumni, you may have seen the article about David Smith, who's our metamaterials person. I loved it because it's called Weird Science. Although David doesn't spend too much time with any clinicians. He's very much in the non-regulated satellites and interesting kind of metamaterials. But another example of faculty that have been here, like Charlie, like Ken, who have multiple spin-out companies. Their students have left and gone on to become CEOs of startup companies. I mean, I think that's another great thing about Duke is so many of our alumni from these great labs are now running their own companies or running other startups. And sometimes they come back and become CEOs of new startups here.
Yeah. I want to point out that in many areas of life, reputation lags reality. When something is really improving, it takes longer for people to recognize that. And I think the success of Duke in innovation and commercialization of research in the last 7 or 8 years is really quite remarkable. We've had historical upward trends of our NIH results, of members of national academies, Nobel Prizes. Those are all markers of success in research. But the one that's had the most dramatic upturn is any marker for the success of our commercialization and translation. And I put a lot of the credit for that I think a lot of the credit for that is owed to Robin Rasor. That it's no
Great
accident
faculty.
that upturn. Yeah, you got to have the great faculty. Without that, you've got nothing. But the team that Robin's built, her approach to this, all the things that have come in have really making this a golden age for translation at Duke. We just got to keep it up.
So I have another great question, but I have to make a comment. One of the questions is, as an undergrad, I had courses run between medical, divinity school, poli-science, botany. The question is, has the divinity school influenced the approaches such as ethics considerations, or was that type of inquiry more from the Stanford school later? When I first got here, I have to tell a story. The provost had me come and present to all the various deans about what, our plans were. And when I got to the divinity school dean, he just said, well, we're praying for inventions. And that was what, but I leave it to you two. I haven't had, I think certainly Stanford and its policy, but can either of you comment on that kind of collaboration?
I can give one quite concrete example. So in around 2002, when I was dean of the medical school, we were approached by the government of Singapore to found a new medical school in Singapore, which we subsequently did. It was a massive project and a big step in the globalization of Duke University. However, there were ethical dimensions to that generated a lot of discussion among faculty and students. Singapore was perceived by some not to have an open press, not to grant freedoms and protect rights in the way that Americans believe in. And there was some truth to that. But the Divinity School hosted a series of workshops where I and others involved in the project went and discussed with faculty and students the ethical dimensions of our venture in Singapore, ultimately deciding that the ethical pluses far outweighed the minuses. And I think that's what the experience has been.
But yeah, I'll also add, there are still a number of courses with the Divinity School, with the other schools. I know they work with physicians between the Divinity School and medical school on a lot of patient care issues. In engineering, we've actually worked with the Divinity School and the Keenan Institute of Ethics on some character education. So they're definitely involved in a lot of what we do. There's also, as I mentioned, there's Keenan Institute, which deals with ethical issues, and there's the Science and Society program, which deals with a lot of technology ethics, such as a lot of the gene editing work that's going on, a lot of the computing work and AI work. So there's an ethics permeation through a lot of what we do, and the Divinity School continues to be involved.
And I'm enjoying one of these comments. I would be remiss, and this is from Debbie Teplin, one of the alums, I would be remiss if I didn't push you to mention one of Duke's major contributions to medicine, the founding of the physician assistant profession, which I didn't know. We were the first program in the country and have remained the #1 program over the decades since. Well, there's something, you learn something every day. Who started that, Sandy?
Yeah, let me speak to that. I mentioned Eugene Stead as one of the founders of this magical marriage of science and medicine at the time, but he was a tremendous innovator in education and patient care as well. He dreamed up the physician's assistant program as a way to put medics returning from Vietnam with enormous clinical experience to work in some way that medicine and nursing didn't provide a path. And that's how it was started. And my wife was one of the first females who became a PA. So Debbie Teplin, I'm with you. And one other innovation of the time, Duke was the first and remains the only medical school that gives its medical students a full year out of their 4 years to do research. So if they want to, Duke medical students can do a kind of mini PhD, which is a path to success in research for many. So there were a lot of innovations of this nature from that time, and I hope we keep it up.
I guess, if we summarize, the future is definitely bright. we have great students that are coming in. We continue to recruit, and I'm those of us of a certain age on here, all the new faculty coming in look like my kids. But it's really fun to be part of the recruiting of the new faculty. And then of course their students. I always worry, are they old enough to actually be in the lab? So it's a great place to be and to visit still because of all the great research and science that's going on here. I don't know, any other closing, and we may be at the end of our time here.
I'd make one more comment about students. If it's mostly alumni listening today, the value of your Duke degree rises and falls on what the current students do when they leave Duke. So we all should be heavily invested in helping make sure the top students come here and that the experiences they have, nurture brilliant careers and lives of value.
Well, from what I've seen, they're more valuable than Bitcoin. So you're doing well.
Well, one tangible feature of a medical school's reputation is what do residency programs think of our graduates? And year after year, if you look at the places Duke Medical School graduates go for their training, it's the top places in the country. So a Duke medical degree is highly valued by those who make those decisions.
Well, thank you to George, Sandy, and Robin for a great session today, and our audience for joining us.